Our first review of the day is going to be for the video game Alan Wake, the very first Alan Wake game here. Now, I played the remaster version of the game, so a more polished version of that just very recently. And this was kind of after I played Control, which was my very first RCU game, the Remedy, they call it Remedy Cinematic Universe, I guess is the
Connected universe.
Connected universe there. So yes, a part of like all these games are connected from Control to Alan Wake to Quantum Break. There, they all have kind of a lot of Easter eggs and connections and characters that cross over with one another. So with this game, Alan Wake here, it's a very simple story. You got this man, you got his wife there, and the man who is Alan Wake himself there, and they going on a nice, trying to get a nice vacation, trying to get away from everything. And then, wouldn't you know it, his wife, takes a dive in a lake full of demon creatures there, and then he tries to end up kind of trying to find her throughout this kind of town here. And you see kind of throughout this, it's a lot of him trying to look for his wife. While looking for his wife, he encounters a lot of these creatures that you see are possessed by a dark spirit there that can only be fleshed out with a light there. That he kind of can shine on them and then expel the darkness within inside these people who are possessed, essentially. So that's kind of what you have here in this game. And with a lot of Remedy games there, it's a lot of not just playing the game itself, but really interacting with the environment and with all the stuff that the game provides. That includes reading all the notes there and all the things that you come across. And Alan Wake is a writer. So he is a writer there. So there's all of that also comes into it, him being an author, especially when you get later into the story and reveal the big mystery about what is happening in this town and why things are happening the way they are happening. So yeah, I'm going to pass it to some of you guys there, get you guys' thoughts on this. You guys are the expert with the RCU and with Alan Wake. Sage, what are your thoughts on Alan Wake Remastered here?
Well, I'm sure you can tell I'm not a big fan, as I've only played it 16 times so far. But no, I'm certainly biased a little bit as a review, right, for me. I love this game. I loved it when it first came out back in 2010. I felt a little bad for this game at the time because it released on the same day as the first Red Dead Redemption, and it just got destroyed by the sales numbers for that game. So it took 14 years before there was a sequel. But all the while, Remedy, just like they did before this and after this, they've been slowly building these little things out, right? And this game is especially, I think, appealing for anyone that just has like a affinity for trying to create anything yourself. Because so much of the story is also kind of an interesting reflection of the creative process. That goes for both the first and second game. But like a big, one of the big plot elements of this game is he's also finding all these pages of a book that he doesn't remember writing. And there's a lot of stuff about writer's block and kind of the demons of an artist and being so absorbed in your work and kind of the way that you let the human relationships in your life kind of fall to the wayside by getting too consumed with your creation. That's just a little blurb. I don't know if we want to do spoilers like right away or kind of give a brief thought and then get into that a little bit later. But
okay, yeah, we'll get into a little bit deeper there. Those were just initial thoughts. We'll get into some deeper thoughts later on there. knoname, what are your thoughts there on that?
I mean, like Sage, this is honestly one of my favorite games. Nothing gets me like no. I don't think I've played a game from a developer that gets me so into the minutia, the like tiny little details like Remedy can. Like there are games I've played with, collectibles, readables, all the, the like. I don't often read every single like index thing about every character, or every single little collectible or archive, whatever they call it in the game. But these ones, like the interconnectedness of everything absolutely like pulls me along in a way I don't think anything else does for me. The first time I played it, a friend had bought it, I think, pretty early, maybe even day one. He played through it and was loving it, and then at the end was like, I don't. In describing it to me, he was like, "Well, it's a writer sort of writing about a writer, and as he's getting more into the meta-ness of it, he was like, honestly, I don't think I'll ever play it again. Keep it. It's right up your alley." And I immediately fell in love with it.
And this is a little bit of the gameplay right here of Alan Wake. So the game is broken up into chapters, so it's like like a book there. So it's broken up into different chapters. And you see kind of some other different cast of characters that come through here, where he's in this little town of Bright Falls, as they call it there, which will show back up later on in other different RCU games there. And like I said, you mainly just have the flashlight. You reset your inventory every time a new chapter kind of starts there. Which at first I was like, why is the inventory resetting every single chapter? But it kind of makes sense because, if you had all that ammo, all those kind of lithium batteries for the flashlight, all that kind of firecrackers, all the things like that, flares. I mean, the game would be really easy if you had all that.
In the original, they're also not Verizon brand, but like
Energizer batteries specifically. And
okay.
There's Verizon billboards in the original too.
Like
a lot of product placement. You can tell how they got the game published. But I think that resetting thing, it took me a while to get used to that too. It brings you back to a point of vulnerability. Like at its core, they are trying to make a horror game, even if it ended up being a little bit more of an action game. Yeah, without that reset, you would just be Max Payneing your way through it. Like it would just feel like a straight action shooter.
Yeah. And from what Sage was telling me, so there's a sequel to this, Alan Wake 2, which came out last year. It came out there.
Yeah, just the like October 20th, I think, of 2023.
Yeah, which came out last year, which is, from what you were telling me, it's more action oriented as opposed to this, which this is more kind of horror, you were saying, or is it the reverse?
I'd flip that.
Okay.
The first one is more action oriented. The second one is this first game is labeled a psychological action thriller. That's like the genre on the side of the box. Alan Wake 2 is labeled survival horror. So much closer to like the kind of limited resource puzzle management type of game that something like Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 2 is kind of doing.
Okay. Yeah. So you kind of got that. So it's a little bit more action oriented in this one here. And a lot of people, when Alan Wake first came out, a lot of people complained about the movement in it there, a lot of the kind of mechanics there. So they kind of polished that up here in this remaster that you're able to do a lot more. And I think also with the sequel, he doesn't get as winded as much as he does here in this first
He's done his cardio, yeah.
Yeah, so he's built up a lot of his cardio there.
Yeah, 13 years to practice.
I was thinking about that on this recent playthrough, and I was realizing if he was able to continue sprinting, like the pacing, you would be getting to the locations so quickly and potentially missing some of his like inner monologue stuff that's going on. So I wondered if that's why they limited his sprint stamina so much.
Almost to force the player to slow down and just hear what the story is a little bit more.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh yeah. Yeah, because you get a lot of that, but it's better. They made a lot of improvements in 2, I think, compared to 1. Would you say that, knoname?
Yeah, I think that. I think in some ways 2 ended up being kind of what they originally wanted from 1. It's more open world. It's more investigation than just going through it's less like reading a novel and more like, honestly, I don't really know what to compare to narratively. The back and forth gets so interesting with the multiple protagonists and stuff.
I would describe Alan Wake 2 as like, and call me a Remedy fanboy and tell me I'm being hyperbolic, but I do think Alan Wake 2 specifically, out of all their games, is maybe the highest peak I've seen for video games as a multimedia experience, like just
Yeah.
in a broad sense, because in the second game you have sequences that are these fully live action filmed sequences that are what you'd expect from an adaptation, not the game. But on top of that, you have stuff like the book pages that it's almost like stopping and listening to an audiobook for a little while. It shifts and warps into so many different types of media, which is also why I say doing like an actual full-on adaptation of these games would be, I think, really, really difficult because they're
Yeah.
already these multimedia experiences that at moments already kind of feel like adaptations in and of themselves at times.
Yeah, I think you need that interactivity. I'm sure they could do it if they wanted to. And there was just recently a video from Sam Lake talking more about wanting to get into potentially doing an in-universe just a TV show or a movie or something like that. But I think the first one does get a little bit of that with the Night Springs episodes, the radio shows. Like Pat Man's radio shows build his character up without ever showing you that. But then also every song that's on both those and the chapter songs at the end is so specifically and immaculately chosen for that point in the narrative. It echoes what's happening in a really cool way.
And thank you, Crazy Heifer. Thank you so much for the biddies there. Thanks for showing up. Very much appreciated there. And with this game, so you had the kind of normal setting here, and then you got more of a difficulty setting with hard, and then there's like a nightmare setting as well with this.
Yep.
At first, I think with the initial playthrough, I think I did either hard. I think I did hard. I think, and then with
Did
the
you
DLC,
hard?
and then with the DLC, I did normal.
Okay.
With the DLC there. At first, I wanted to switch to normal. At first, when I was playing this, when I had it on hard, because I was just like, at first, when you're very first playing this game, you don't really have much equipment going on, and then there's like 4 or 5 people coming at you, and there is that dodge mechanic that kind of is in the game there where you have it. But I found that a little kind of challenging in there, just right out the gate with it. But I got used to it eventually there. Do you think that this game there, if you were recommended, people could just start off on kind of normal there? Because I think with this game, you said it's a kind of experiencing a lot of the story there with this and kind of the world rather than the combat, given how clunky the combat is. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely a game that I tell people to play for story more than gameplay, 100%. I think the gameplay can still be very fun here. I think it's just got such a specific and admittedly janky kind of rhythm to it that, like, I think once you key into how it feels and how to do kind of crowd control with the enemies, I think it can feel really good and it can feel very satisfying. But it is very specific. Like, there's not another game I can think of that has this exact sort of crowd control style gameplay to it. And so, like, if anybody played this and tell me, like, oh yeah, the story was really cool, but I didn't think the combat was that great and it was kind of hard, I would not blame anyone for saying that.
Yeah.
But I like to tell people, if you're not sure you're going to have fun with the combat part of it, just put it on easy and just play for the story.
Yeah.
Just enjoy the
100%.
narrative. That's always my recommendation.
I also think, I after playing it a bunch and some of that same crowd control stuff, like strategies that work in one also work in Control. And I noticed playing those, like, I have kind of a default like enemies spawn and I do the same thing every time. Like backtrack a little bit, make sure they're all in the flashlight beam, like wide beam, and then whoever's closest, that's who you focus on. But I being someone who enjoys the game, even then, like, it starts to feel sort of mechanical and repetitive to just like, oh, enemy spawned, I'm doing the thing I do, take them out, and then I get to keep going. Where, yeah, especially in Control does a lot better, has many ways of varying that, but specifically for Alan Wake, the combat is probably the lowest part of the game, or the, like, I wouldn't say worst. I don't think it's terrible, but is definitely the thing that holds it back the most, I guess.
I think it's also just the amount of time you spend doing it too.
Totally.
Because, like, for a game that has all these interesting themes about storytelling and creativity and what goes into this work, and none of that stuff's really present in the gameplay. Like, that's one of the big differences between the first game and the second game. The act of writing is itself part of the gameplay in two. You actually, yourself as the player, are doing some writing in a certain way in the game. Whereas, yeah, in Alan Wake 1, it is so much of the game is this combat. Like, you get these story sequences where you'll walk around and you'll hear dialogue and you'll get some kind of straight narrative. And then, yeah, there's collectibles to find and you're running around, but there's not really much in the way of puzzles. There's not really much in the way of other types of gameplay to break up the combat. It's just kind of the same combat the whole way through, which, again, I don't think is bad. But especially if the combat's not really clicking for you, it could 100% feel like it's really dragging it down because there's just so much of it. And that's also one of the biggest improvements in the second game is, like, you'll run into a little combat, you'll fight like 2 or 3 guys, and then it'll be like, all right, here's a whole bunch of other things to do before you have another combat sequence. So
I will say it had, at the time that it released, it did have, even though I wasn't loving the combat, it had one of my favorite combat sequences of a game I had played up to that point, which was the Anderson Farm fight. I think that is so much fun.
Yeah,
that's the peak of the actual gameplay part of this game for sure.
And that's the sequence right here. Where it's just like a concert kind of going on with the music playing, and then you got the fireworks and stage lights and everything like that. So that's is probably the best action sequence of the game there, and probably one of the closest things that come to a boss fight in the actual game. Really, I mean, there's no real boss fight in this game, but it's just like the wave of enemies kind of come at you, and then you gotta defend there. You gotta wait, just stave off all these horde of enemies that are coming at you. So sometimes it'll mix in some stuff like this with the combat. Plus, like, there's some other different enemy types that kind of come in here. Like, not only the people, like any kind of video game, you got your regular standard enemies, but then you got your big bruiser enemies that take a longer time to kind of go down. They also bring in like bats and stuff like that, animals that kind of come out that also possess. So it's like all these big wave of birds that come at you, and you got to fight them when, like, usually they come up when you're trying to get platform to another situation, like you're on a trolley or something and you're trying to get to another thing there. That'll come into play. But yeah, this is by far probably, of all the combat sequences in the game, I think this is the best one by far there. But yeah, I mean, it's not the best combat you probably see there in a video game. You probably mainly would be playing it for the story. But yeah, I still think it's not the worst you've ever seen, but it's decent. Character wise, what do you all think about the cast of characters in this game there?
Well, now here's where we start really getting to what we like about this so much. I love the whole cast of characters here. And some of that's also informed by what they do with some of this after the game. But just with the title character Alan Wake too, and this is where we can get into where I think there is a few different layers and kind of context that you can look at this story under. And Alan Wake is, I think, a great character because he's not particularly heroic.
He's a dick.
he's a total dick. He's a conceited celebrity douchebag, getting into fights all the time, just strung out on drugs, making things real difficult for his wife. And you even hear at one point some like recordings where she speaks to the Dr. Hartman character over the phone, and you hear her and how worried she is about Alan, and just kind of the lifestyle he's living. And so you have, I mean, like 30 seconds into meeting the Dr. Hartman character, Alan punches him in the face. Like I mean, granted, Hartman kind of deserved it, but even still, just for someone's immediate instinct to just be to go right for it, he's got a lot of emotional problems.
And that's in a police station too, if I remember right.
Yes, he also he assaults a guy immediately in a police station upon meeting him. Yeah, but I mean, even just the beginning, his wife has taken him on this vacation because she's worried about his writer's block and these problems he's been having, and she like gifts him a typewriter as like a present, and because it is pushing him to do this work he doesn't want to do, he immediately freaks out, leaves her in the dark alone, which he knows is like a huge phobia that she has, right? And then she's only taken by this dark thing because he leaves her there by herself. Even though he knows what he's doing in that moment, he just kind of pushes away and does it anyway. And I think that's a really interesting thing for the character to go through in this game, because you then have Barry, right, the agent's best friend character that's with him. And in a lot of ways, it's kind of like his public image is almost tagging along in the story. It's like he's trying to kind of get a grip on the situation, and he's trying to grow, but it literally, his public image is following him everywhere as he's trying to move on a little bit. And that goes in the form of his agent being there. That comes in the form of people like Emil Hartman trying to manipulate him, fans like Rose recognizing him, that he can't have a peace and quiet on his vacation. There's all these little ways in which it's like, no matter how hard he's pushing, his life kind of keeps coming back up. And then to kind of just bring in, I guess, the first kind of connectivity maybe to other things here. But he's very famous for writing. Basically, he's famous for writing Max Payne. This is this legacy franchise of his that he's written, and that's where there's a whole other layer that you can look at this other than literal, is that in a way Alan Wake is almost Remedy, the game studio, almost kind of anthropomorphized into a character, because Remedy made these two Max Payne games, right? Got this huge acclaim and mainstream popularity, and then they wanted to move on and do something else and experiment with different ideas. And Max Payne 2 came out in 2003, and it took them all this writer's block or creative block or however you want to call it for a video game. It took until 2010 for them to put Alan Wake out. So there is this way in which Alan's struggle as a creator is like this direct kind of real life reflection of Remedy's struggle as a game studio to produce something.
What say you there, None?
I mean, so to add another layer on there, there's also the look at it, and I don't remember. I was just listening to something Sage sent me talking about going deep into like the Jungian philosophy and psychology of this game, and all of the layered symbolism and the game of like archetypes, and the amount you can deep dive into this story and still find interesting things. I think that I will be playing this every time I play this game. I notice something new. Every time I listen to an old Gods of Asgard song, I text Sage about something else I noticed. Like, it's so layered. There's so much meat on the bones of this.
I mean, one point you can draw really, really like immediately with this is, I mean, literally the whole process of shadow integration in Jungian
Mhm.
psychology, right? Like that's one of the big things people will talk about from Carl Jung. And it's, you have this aspect of yourself that you hate. When you hate someone, someone else, and you have these intense feelings of anger towards another person, it is the idea there is it is often you are recognizing your shadow self in someone else. And so for this, I mean, it's all about you're fighting shadows the entire time, right? I mean, it's all about he's confronting his inner shadow, his shadow of the mind here. I mean, you even have, closer to the end of the game, you even have a literal doppelganger element kind of brought up. That's more in the DLCs. Um, but and then on top of that, even moving away from like the Carl Jung stuff, there's also just an interesting breakdown of like Campbell's monomyth, right? Like that kind of structure of the hero's journey. Um, his book that he doesn't remember writing, that you're picking up pages all throughout the game, is titled Departure. Departure is the first stage of Campbell's monomyth. It's departure, initiation, return, right? And that's like the basic kind of template for the hero's journey in any story, right? Just the departure into the unknown, the initiation into that unknown world, and then the return where whatever protagonist kind of comes back with whatever newfound skill or ability that enriches them as like a character and a person. And so yeah, there's all sorts of like No Name said, it's a story that is kind of about stories and about archetypes within stories.
Mm, yeah. You mentioned some other characters here. Barry, who is his agent, who comes by there as the comedic relief
Mhm.
of the series there. You got that. You got also the I guess she was a deputy or sheriff there.
Yeah, Sheriff Sarah Breaker,
Yeah,
who there
sheriff.
were actually some tie-in comic books that came out after this game. I don't have them physically. I don't know where they released physically, but you do see her father Frank Breaker, who is set up kind of even in those comics as kind of an FBC agent. It's a little tying into kind of the future a little bit already.
Yeah. And I'm seeing two different things. I'm seeing one place that says here the director of it was Pietri Giovaletto, and then I'm seeing another place where it says Marcus Mackey was the director of this game here.
Let me see here. It might
Both
be the
were
difference of the original release versus the remaster.
okay. Because I'm looking at it. This one here says for 2010. It has Marcus Mackey as the director on this one, and then
Yeah,
so
that is correct. And then let me just double check the remaster.
yeah.
And the yeah. That is what that difference is. That's
Okay.
the director for the original game, and then the director for the remastered release.
Okay. And were there any major changes from the remaster from the original?
So there's a couple. It's not like a ton of big stuff. So one thing is there's a bunch of product placement in the original game. Energizer brand batteries. There's Verizon cell phone billboards all over the place. In fact, in the I believe it's the Signal DLCs, the first of the two DLC chapters, when you go into that house and you get a phone from the lights Tom Zane, right, that you're communicating with, the camera is literally like it's under like a glass table and it's like zoomed in on a Verizon wireless logo on the face of the phone. And then as Alan picks the phone up, Tom Zane goes, "Alan, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?" That part is still in. The dialogue stayed, but yeah, they changed all that brand stuff. So it's in universe ads now in the remastered version, and then
Mhm.
you also get a bunch of ads that are kind of teases for stuff in the second game, places and products that come up in the sequel, which they hadn't necessarily thought of on the actual original release. But oh yeah,
They got a whole
there's just a full on
Verizon
commercial.
commercial right here. Yeah, it's just
Mhm.
I forgot
cool.
about that.
Yeah. So it's
And then the biggest change in terms of like the game itself is the faces look way
Oh my
better
gosh.
in the remaster. The face animations, and I'll say even in the original release of this game, the environments look really good. The character models outside the faces, like hair and clothes and all that, that looks pretty good, even for as old as the game is now. But the faces are the thing that you go back and you're like,
Wow,
ooh.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it doesn't
I,
even
I
look
feel
like Ilka Billy.
I feel like Alice's face in the first one, if it is one of the roughest ones. Like even just in
Yeah,
that car, that opening scene, it it's even she's for some reason even blockier than the rest of everybody.
she looks like a
Uh,
fish monster trying to eat his face when they kiss.
Let me see if I can pull up the Alice one there. Let me see if I can get her. Yeah, but you see kind of a little side by side kind of comparison there
Mhm. I
with it.
think the second one had less of the fog, if I remember right.
Yeah, yeah. The remaster it thins the fog out just a little bit. Um, yeah, for sure. It like it's your vision's not as obstructed because and that's partially because the draw distance that the game's able to compute is superior. So like the
Hmm.
fog falls away a little bit and you can see more of the environment. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah, you can see the faces. Yeah, you can see a lot more improvement with the faces there. So you can see that in both in both
then
the
not
yeah.
to bring it down either, but Brett Madden, the actress that played Alice in that original game, did pass away in
Mhm.
I want to say 2020. It is a different actress that's playing that character in the second game.
Okay. Yeah. Any final thoughts and rating there for Alan Wake remaster? There, you want to get into a lot of the
Well, I could
yeah,
go forever.
yeah. You want to get into a lot of the deeper stuff there, and then kind of the ending, and then the meaning of the ending.
Yeah, I mean, we can do you want to do rating before getting into like the super spoilery stuff?
Yeah.
Okay. So as far as I always say like I don't think a to call something like a masterpiece is not necessarily to say that it is flawless. It is to acknowledge its flaws and say the things that work for me about it are so good that it kind of rises to that level despite that. And I won't go like full, all the way a top scorer here, but I will still give this a peak, which is the second highest rating here. Just because I think that what it does for stories and video games, I think is so unique, so different from the rest of the crowd. It stands out so much, and I mean, there's a lot of things that just appeal to me in particular about the way that this is done. That yeah, despite the gameplay being rough around the edges and there being a little too much of the same thing in certain parts of it, uh, I still think that the effect that the story has on me and even what I want to do creatively in my own time is so strong that yeah, I'm going up with a peak for it.
Okay. So no names for the rating system we got. We get the highest you can give something is this is cinema. Then below that is a peak. Then below that is a tune in. Then below that is a stream it. Our negative ratings here. So the very lowest you can give something is waste of fucking film. And then above that is a burn it. And then above that is a skip it or a tune out. So what would be your rating for Alan Wake?
I would echo most of what Sage said. Peak for me. I think that I can't think of very many other games that I could play straight up twice back to back. Immediately replaying it after I played it and have fun both times. There are so many things that it just does right for me, and as we said, mechanically it's not that top tier, but it's worth it even despite that.
Mm, and like I said, not that long of a game, about 6 to 10 hours, maybe about that kind of length there. Probably gonna get a little extra playthrough depending on what difficulty you play it at. If you play it on a more harder difficulty, you're probably gonna get a little more life out of that because you're probably gonna die quite a bit in it. So there is that.
There's also
No,
special manuscript pages that you can only get on that harder difficulty too.
yeah. There is DLC with it as well if people wanted that. attached to it. What was the name of the two DLCs that you had?
The Signal and the Writer, which if you're getting the remastered version, they come packaged in. You don't have to make any sort of separate purchase for them.
And then they also have a standalone spinoff, which called Alan Wake's American Nightmare. If people wanted to also check that out, that's on. I think only available on Steam. I think it's only available on.
I think you can still get it on the Xbox marketplace, but it never made its way to PlayStation in any capacity. It was at the time when they were doing like this big kind of Xbox Live Arcade push, like stuff like Limbo had come out recently for the first time, and there was kind of this whole branding just around Xbox Live Arcade, and it was like a title kind of specifically made for that.
Yeah. So you got that mission stuff with the combat there. There might be some issues there, but yeah, but even with those issues, the combat, I still think it's decent, and just also, how you're dispatching of these enemies with the various of using the flashlight, using the handheld flares, the flare guns, all that stuff is pretty great there. How you're dispatching of them, of those enemies. The character work here is very good from Alan Wake to the other cast characters that you have on this. This being about a writer and how it kind of uses that to its advantage with the storytelling and how that incorporates there. It feels very nicely with that. And then also using its influences there from other sources, something like a David Lynch or Stephen King, or various other horror kind of sources there, that also works very well with this. So yeah, I would also give it I think I'd give it a strong tune in. I give it a strong tune in for me there. For Alan Wake 1, and I played the remastered version of this, which is available right now for people. When I got it, I think it was on sale. I think it was only about $8, something like that. The remastered.
Good deal.
It's on sale pretty often too.
Yeah, so you get that, and you get the two DLCs, like Say said, with it. If you get the remastered version, and then I think they were running a sale for the American Nightmare during Black Friday, and when it was Christmas time around there, I don't know, but it was only like about
It was like $2.99.
$2.99 for that. So if you wanted some extra stuff there, so you can get basically play the whole Alan Wake, all the stuff there for probably under $20 there. So that's a pretty good deal, I think, for this. So yeah, a little bit of stuff like this, a little bit of information about Alan Wake there. So it took 5 years to create this first game there. They wanted to be the antithesis to the Max Payne games, which were kind of straightforward action games there. And so they did that. And of course, the writers on this, Sam Lake was one of the lead writers on this game. They're very kind of I guess you would say he's the face of Remedy, pretty much. I guess you would say
100%. As much as like Hideo Kojima is the face of like Kojima Productions.
Yeah. And throughout the years, the game garnered a cult following here. A lot of people praised the visuals, sound, narrative, pacing, and atmosphere. Alan Wake was awarded the first spot in Time Magazine's list of top 10 video games of 2010. So that's a very coveted spot there. Like you said, it got crushed by Red Dead Redemption when sales-wise, when it came out there. So it got crushed by I wonder what other great games came out in 2010, but that's a pretty top honor there to be top spot there. But yeah. So Sage with the peak, knoname with the peak, and I'm with the tune in there for Alan Wake. All right. So Sage, like I said, you want to get into some spoiler talk there about the ending of the game. Let people know about the ending, kind of what happens there, and kind of what else it leads to within the RCU there.
Yeah. So to talk about the ending, I think first we have to kind of bring up the Tom Zane character. That's kind of sprinkled in throughout the game. There's a lot of little bits and pieces. So first, what I want to do is, Josh, I want to ask you, what is your understanding of Tom Zane as of right now, after just having played like just Alan
Wake? So Tom Zane, so he's the figure that kind of comes in Alan Wake, that speaks to him originally initially at first there, that kind of hands him the very first flashlight in it, as well as a gun, and says, go out, this is how you actually handle the darkness and everything like that. And when you see him in the game with his physical form, he's wearing a submarine suit there, like old school submarine suit there that you have. Actually, I have a picture of a little bit of it. So he's wearing this right here. Kind of something like that old school like that. I think his position in the story is that it seems like he's kind of like a godlike figure there almost, or someone, because it's kind of like you don't know if it's Alan Wake who can basically write reality, or is it Thomas Zane that is writing him to write reality, to rewrite reality almost. So it seems like kind of that. So that's kind of my understanding a little bit of Thomas.
So yeah, you're totally on the right trajectory there. So we this character was, back in the 1970s. He woke this thing up. It took on the form of his girlfriend, and because he was not careful with how he tried to write her back to life, he broke the rules of storytelling. And so that's another interesting element here, is that the dark presence is also kind of, acting in this like overbearing producer role too, like an artist might feel pressured at a corporation to alter their art in to produce a certain audience pleasing outcome without it being authentic. So that kind of plays into an element of it. And then yeah, as you get to further and further into the game, you have this big reveal. Alan remembers what happened in the week that he's been missing, right? It's totally blacked out and forgot a week at the beginning of the game. And it's that, yeah, it's when he went into this dark place under the lake, it is like a whole other dimension. It's like another reality, and he's trapped there, and he has this eldritch entity, just called the Dark Presence, over his shoulder, kind of pushing him to write things a certain way. And Tom Zane and Alan basically there writes Tom Zane into the story as a Deus Ex Machina to kind of allow him to escape. But then, right kind of before the game's over, you have this reveal of, oh, Tom Zane wrote himself out of reality to try and stop the Dark Presence from escaping back in the day. But he leaves this shoebox with some things left in it. And anything left in the shoebox won't be erased, right? Like everything outside of it is. So people don't remember Tom Zane in this world, right? He's just like kind of this unknown factor. It's kind of hard to dig up information on him. And this page is left in the shoebox for Alan to read, and it's got this clicker, right? This magic clicker, which if you've played Control, you'll recognize as an object of power, because that terminology kind of comes backwards into the first game. But what's interesting about it is it's got this implication of kind of an Ouroboros element, like, did Alan write Tom writing him? Did Tom actually write this moment from Alan's childhood? But what's interesting is that Tom Zane, this diver in the game, is voiced by James McCaffrey, the voice of Max Payne and Alex Casey. So that would seem to imply that this version of Tom Zane is Alan's facsimile of Tom Zane rather than the real Tom Zane, because it's actually literally got the voice of Max Payne and Alex Casey, which is the primary voice of Alan's fictional character or his creation. That and that keeps going as we go into future games. But even just thinking about that much of it really, I think, gets you primed for what they do in Control and then Alan Wake too. And then I want to, of course, talk about the very end of the game, the base game, not the DLC. But Alan basically understands, all right, this thing, it's going to take advantage of plot holes. There has to be balance in the story. I have to actually make the writing good, otherwise this thing gets what it wants. So he has to lock himself into this place, and for Alice to be able to go free. And you basically have 14 years left off on this. It's not a lake, it's an ocean cliffhanger, right? And that is basically implying it is not just a small space under this lake, it is an entire reality. It's an ocean, right? It's this massive, endless, sprawling dimension made of nightmares. But then I think the way that leads into the DLC, and that's interesting. It's an interesting case for DLC in games and whether or not it makes sense for things to be DLC, or if it feels like they're being cut off to be sold as DLC. Because I actually think, to kind of bring it back and circle to the whole Carl Jung psychology of this whole thing, the 2 DLC episodes, that actually is the literal integrating of the shadow happening physically on screen. And that feels kind of like what the character development of the whole game is really building up to. You have these moments where Alan is even he's seeing almost like this false projection of how he feels about himself coming out of other characters' mouths, and kind of coming to terms with the fact that, again, that is the shadow, that is a projection of how you feel about yourself. And so it's an interesting thing, and I wouldn't necessarily dock points for that, but it is weird that like almost like the point of the character development does come in the DLC rather than in the end of the base game.
And what about you, Nona?
Yeah, I mean, to just jump off that point, I think they're absolutely necessary for the story to have the full value. For those DLCs, and it's too bad that American Nightmare is lost in there, because some of that is present there as well. But it's probably not going to get a remaster like the original game did, or at least anytime
Microsoft's
soon.
cold dead hands.
Yeah, exactly. There's a line by Zane. I don't remember if it's in the last chapter or the DLCs. I think it's in one of the DLCs where Alan says, "Well, you did this," and Zane just kind of goes, and then changes the subject. Where it's this question of like, did Zane actually do any of this? The page you find that was supposedly written by Zane way more has Alan's writing cadence than Tom's, which is poetry, is what we're told. And it's this very narrative scene written in sort of Alan's clipped sentence, very Stephen King type writing. That just sort of brings these questions about, is that actually the person Tom Zane, or some representation that Alan has pulled from his own creativity?
Or could they somehow be the same person even?
Right. Yeah. No,
the
Tom Zane question is one of the biggest lingering questions in the Remedy universe currently, and I honestly don't know. I mean, the quote at the start of the very start of the game saying that the answer isn't what's satisfying, it's the mystery, makes me wonder if we'll ever know the full story of Zane before the whole RCU is complete.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's one of those games that it rewards the player for digging deeper there, for reading all the things, for doing the DLC. You know what I mean, to add the extra story there. Even if you play just the base game, to get really the full experience, you need to really go and play the DLC. So it makes the DLC really worth playing there. So yeah,